This incident occurred a few years back in the midst of fall. I was employed as a cashier at Spirit Halloween, one of the few seasonal jobs I rotated through. Truthfully, Spirit Halloween was my preferred workplace. Mostly, my responsibilities revolved around selling Halloween merchandise and party supplies. The job itself was relatively easy. It was significantly less strenuous compared to working at places like Walmart or Target. Still, like any job, it came with its downsides. For Spirit Halloween, those downsides lay with the customers. Not every customer was an issue, but some certainly stood out. There were the irritating little kids racing around and tampering with everything, treating the store like it was a toy library. Then, there was the smart-ass guy who thought it would be amusing to don a mask and jump out at people holding fake knives. However, the worst aspect was the thieves. When I first began working there, I didn't anticipate shoplifting being a significant issue. Like any major retail store, we operated under a no-chase policy due to liability concerns. Nonetheless, we were still somewhat responsible for inventory loss. Therefore, we stayed vigilant for any suspicious shoppers. It's more prudent to approach them before they attempt to leave, giving them an opportunity to return their stolen goods before involving law enforcement. One evening, while working the register alone, my only co-worker on shift was busy cleaning and restocking. We were both preoccupied with our own tasks. My job had several small downtimes, like waiting for customers to check out and standing idle during system processing. During these brief pauses, I kept an eye on the other patrons in the store. Eventually, approaching the end of the night, two girls walked in together. I didn't want to judge them solely based on their appearance, but they appeared to be high school students. They had backpacks with them and were engrossed in making or watching TikToks on their phones. Typically, kids around that age lack money and disregard the consequences of their actions. So I suspected they might attempt to swipe some makeup or similar items. They were loud and obnoxiously laughing, which further heightened my vigilance. It wasn't long before they noticed my scrutiny and shot me some dirty looks while muttering insults just loud enough for me to hear. "Look at this loser profiling us. She probably got this job because of her looks." I was too busy at that moment to care about their taunts. As they meandered into the rest of the store, I allowed them to continue for a while. I made the decision to casually follow their path, and it didn't take long to find them. They were brazenly stuffing items into their backpacks without even attempting to conceal their actions. I swiftly approached and confronted them, saying, "Excuse me, I just saw you putting those items in your bags. Chill out, lady. We were going to buy those. We just didn't want to use the baskets. You think I haven't heard that excuse 1,000 times? Just hand over what you took, and I won't call the police. We didn't take anything, so leave us alone. Nut liquor. Get that stuff out of your backpack now. Make us, bitch." The girl I was speaking to began to flee. Admittedly, the next action I took was a foolish mistake fueled by emotion. I reached out and grabbed her arm, yanking her back so she couldn't escape. In a flash, the other girl shoved me from behind, causing me to hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the breath out of me, and as I struggled to regain my footing, I managed to get to my knees. Looking up, I was met with her holding a canister of pepper spray inches from my face. Suddenly, my world went dark. I was blinded instantly. Then, a burning heat overwhelmed my face and entire body, making it difficult to breathe as I began to gag uncontrollably. Panic set in as I screamed and flailed, trying to grasp for something to pull myself up. I collided with shelves, knocking items to the ground, and stumbled several more times before I finally heard my co-worker's voice. They held me steady and assisted me in calming down, guiding me to the restroom to rinse out my eyes and mouth. They even called an ambulance for me, and I was transported to the hospital. It was a long stretch of excruciating minutes before I felt somewhat normal again in terms of vision and breathing. The pain lingered for hours after, but I ultimately turned out okay. By that time, those girls had already fled the scene. Fortunately, the police tracked them down quickly and arrested them at their homes. The legal aftermath was complicated due to my actions being against policy, with their lawyers even asserting self-defense for their assault against me. Thankfully, justice was served, but they weren't locked away for long. Now, each time autumn arrives, I am reminded of this incident. Every time I clock in at Spirit Halloween, I fear I might encounter them again. 2 women were arrested following an attack on a worker at a store in North London, Ontario. The police began investigating after an employee was reportedly pepper sprayed. Police and an ambulance responded to Spirit Halloween around 9:40 p.m. on a Wednesday after it was alleged that an employee was assaulted. It was reported that the 2 women entered the store, where they were seen hiding items in bags, and were later asked to exit the premises. An argument ensued, leading to one of the employees being pepper sprayed. After the attack, the 2 women fled the store. Fortunately, police stated that the victims did not sustain serious injuries. Both women were later apprehended at their residences. Following the investigation, both women were released from custody and are scheduled to appear in London court at a later date. The victim reported that there have been 7 other incidents over the last 3 months in which employees at the store have faced physical attacks. There are a myriad of reasons one might dislike fall. Kids return to school, warm weather dissipates, and people who dread family gatherings for the holidays feel the pressure mounting. Personally, I harbor a very particular anxiety during this season. Years ago, I was in a relationship with a guy named Kenneth, though he preferred to be called Kenny. He had a muscular, stocky build, exactly the type I was drawn to. He was the first person I became seriously involved with after my previous relationship ended when my son was born. Unfortunately, as time went on, the relationship deteriorated. Kenny became increasingly controlling, interrogating me daily, seizing my phone to scrutinize it, constantly accusing me of infidelity. If he found anything that validated his suspicions, he would resort to violence. He made threats against both me and my son, and when he wasn't physically attacking me, he would take out his anger by breaking things. It became increasingly challenging to gain his approval for any social activities that didn't include him. So I started keeping my plans to myself. One day after work, I went directly to celebrate a friend's birthday. My son was spending the night at my mother's, and Kenny was supposed to be working late, so I thought he'd be none the wiser. After a few hours, I returned home to discover Kenny standing right by the door, waiting for me. "Where have you been?" he barked. "I was just at a birthday party for a friend, I swear." In an instant, Kenny threw me inside, forcing me to panic as I dashed into the bedroom. I began packing a bag, intending to spend the night with my mom when he entered. He shoved me onto the bed, attempting to pin me down. I fought back fiercely, kicking and scratching like a wild animal, managing to escape from under him. I bolted out of the house and drove straight to my mother's. I had kept the severity of the situation with Kenny from her. That night, I sobbed as I recounted the encounter with him, along with all the terrible things he had subjected me to over the years. At that point, the only option was to call the police. I hesitated due to fear of what Kenny might do, but ultimately, I followed through. A little while later, he was removed from my home, and I filed a restraining order against him. I blocked his number and all his social media accounts and changed the locks to officially end our relationship. We were separated for a few weeks. Yet this was not where it ended. One night while watching TV with my son, I received a random text from an unknown number. I was certain it was Kenny. The initial words confirmed my suspicions. "It's going to take more than that to stop me, bitch." It enraged me that it had only been a matter of weeks, and he was already breaching the restraining order. I tried to disregard the text, but moments later my phone began to ring. I was just trying to enjoy time with my child and move on. Yet here he was trying to sabotage my life again. I couldn't believe I had ever gotten involved with someone like him. But the real punch to the gut came when I glanced out of the living room window and saw Kenny waiting outside, watching us. He had his phone in hand, smirking, having been there for who knows how long. "Let me in," he sneered. "Baby, go to your room and hide. I want to give that kid a little sibling, but I need you." "Leave me alone or I'll call the cops," I threatened. Kenny ignored me, heading toward the door and attempting to force his way in. I retrieved my taser from the back and moved to my son's room, hiding there with him. I called the police and then waited, listening to Kenny pound against the door, shaking the very walls of our home. If he got in, I was prepared to do whatever it took to protect myself and my son. As the minutes dragged on, it seemed inevitable, but then the banging ceased. Outside, the police arrived and managed to scare Kenny off. He bolted across the freeway and jumped the fence into the nearby corn maze, which was just weeks away from opening for Halloween. Measuring in winding narrow passages through 10-foot-high corn stalks, that was where Kenny chose to escape, derailing my plans to take my son there once it opened. The police established a perimeter and commenced their search. Meanwhile, they allowed us to stay in the cruiser for safety, as we feared he might return. The search stretched for hours over the 4-acre maze, with law enforcement examining every corner, yet they still couldn't locate him. Eventually, they discovered him hiding in a chicken coop, also owned by the maze's grower. Kenny was apprehended for violating the restraining order and thrown in jail. A significant amount of time has passed since then, and I wish I could forget all of this. Unfortunately, each fall, the dread that he will resurface peaks. This story was inspired by a troubling fall incident where it took 2 hours, a plane, and 6 officers to apprehend a suspected stalker after he fled into an elaborate corn maze. Police began their search for Ryan Kenneth Watt, 29, on a Friday evening, after his ex-girlfriend reported that he had violated a restraining order by texting and calling her. Officers attempted to locate Watt, described as transient with a history of stalking, at a homeless encampment but were unsuccessful. The following morning, the police returned to the camp and spotted Watt shortly before 9 a.m. He fled across a nearby freeway and entered a corn maze being prepared for Halloween visitors that had yet to open. Officers set a perimeter around the maze, requested the California Highway Patrol for backup, and deployed an aircraft to circle the area. They combed through the maze thoroughly, but Watt remained elusive. Eventually, an officer noticed a chicken coop about 20 feet from the maze's edge. Upon kicking the door, they found Watt hiding inside. He was arrested without incident just before 11 a.m. Investigators had already been monitoring him even before the ex-girlfriend reported the situation, as he had a history of appearing uninvited at her home and her son's school, hacking her social media accounts, and texting her while she was with friends to proclaim he was watching. This next tale begins in the fall of 2010. At the time, I was married to my wife, and together we were raising our daughter, Jennifer. Back then, things were anything but perfect. Jennifer was involved with a low-life line cook named Daniel. She referred to him as attractive due to his supposed bad boy persona, but I recognized he was unsuitable for her, which led me to force them to break up. Sure, Jennifer was upset, but my wife and I believed she would eventually move on. She was still relying on us until completing high school, and that's what I wanted her to prioritize. Call me a typical Asian father, but I knew what was best for my daughter. For a short period, everything was smooth sailing. Jennifer was excelling academically, and I no longer had to hear about that Daniel guy. However, this was not to last. Eventually, I noticed Jennifer starting to come home from school later than usual. Naturally, I became suspicious and sensed that she was rekindling her relationship with that loser. Knowing that confronting her without solid proof would only lead to more fabrications, I resolved to catch them in the act. One day I called in sick from work. While she prepared for school, I quietly snuck into my car and waited for her to leave. As anticipated, she didn't head school. In a blind fit of rage, I leapt from my car and pulled them apart, shouting, "Get your hands off my daughter, you scumbag!" "Dad, stop! You can't do this," she pleaded. "Shut up! I'll deal with your disgraceful boyfriend when we get home." "Don't talk down to her like that, man. Show some respect," he shot back. "Respect? I'm her father, and she's too young for you. I could call the police and have you arrested, pedophile." I dragged Jennifer into my car and took her where she belonged, school. Upon arriving at the front office, I was met with the shocking revelation that my daughter was no longer enrolled. Apparently, she had not attended school even once that entire fall semester. The seemingly perfect report cards she had shown me were all forgeries she had made with Daniel. My mind spun as I grasped the fact that she had been lying to me, neglecting her education in favor of spending time with him. My wife nearly fainted when I brought Jennifer home and extracted the confession. In that moment, we were at a loss as to how to address the situation and opted to lock her in her room to prevent any further mistakes. For the next few nights, our household was tumultuous. We resolved to keep Jennifer confined as we deliberated our options for therapy or rehabilitation to steer her back on the right path. One night, while my wife and I were watching TV in the living room with the lights off to protect our identities, a loud knock resonated at the door. More of a bang than a knock. Confused, we looked at each other. It was nearly midnight. Who could possibly disturb us at such an hour? Cautiously, I rose and instructed my wife to stay put, convinced it was that worthless Daniel again. Then, out of the blue, the most horrific and gut-wrenching scene unfolded before my eyes. The door burst open, and 3 men stormed in, brandishing weapons and firing indiscriminately. Suddenly, I felt a searing pain as I was struck, collapsing from the impact as it sent me spiraling out of my own body. The next moments were a blur of chaos. "Get down now! Where's the money at?" they shouted. "Show us the money, bitch!" I shouted back. "Get out of my house!" My wife wasn't even trying to run. She was in the middle of trying to explain to them what they were after when they brutally killed her right before my eyes. Witnessing her murder inflicted a pain deeper than any bullet could cause. The next thing I witnessed was all 3 men overpowering my daughter, tying her up and dragging her down the hall. I knew I was powerless to intervene, unarmed, wounded, and outnumbered. The guilt and shame of abandoning my daughter to whatever fate awaited her weighed heavily upon me. I had no choice but to escape while they were distracted and seek help. I crawled, gasping for air and bleeding until I managed to get outside, where a random passerby on the sidewalk helped me to safety and called the police. I was unaware of what transpired in the house as the ambulance transported me away. At the hospital, they induced a coma to stabilize me. When I finally woke up, I was jolted into reality and recalled seeing my daughter unbound, speaking calmly with one of the intruders. It struck me hard. She wasn't merely a victim. She had orchestrated the entire scheme. She and her useless boyfriend had plotted this entire ordeal, employing hitmen to eliminate my wife and me so they could be together. My wife is gone, my daughter is incarcerated, and I am left with nothing. Every time fall rolls around, I am reminded of this gut-wrenching reality. This narrative draws inspiration from a horrific incident that unfolded on the night of November 8, 2010. A frantic 911 call was made from a home in Ontario, Canada, by a young woman named Jennifer Pan, who reported that armed men had forced their way into the residence, demanding money. Jennifer claimed the intruders had tied her up, executed her parents, and then fled the scene. In the background of her call, her father, Hui Han, could be heard screaming in pain. He managed to survive the attack and required urgent medical attention, but his wife, Bihan, sadly did not make it. Initially, the Pans appeared to be random victims of a tragic home invasion in their usually tranquil neighborhood. However, as more details surfaced, it became evident that Jennifer was hiding more about that night's events than she had initially let on. Jennifer later admitted to enlisting her then-boyfriend Daniel Wong to assist her in plotting to murder her parents, intending to make it look like a botched robbery, all while employing 3 hitmen: David Melvaginam, Leonard Crawford, and Eric Carty, with Jennifer playing the role of a feeble witness. The motive behind this horrifying act stemmed from her belief that her parents' expectations were excessively strict. After her lies about her education and relationship with Daniel came to light, their already strained relationship deteriorated, resulting in Jennifer's drastic actions. Huihan Pan testified during his daughter's trial in 2014, where Jennifer received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Both Wong and the accomplices were also convicted and given similar life sentences with the same potential for parole.